President.
Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, last week I spoke on the floor and I reflected on the unthinkable events of January 6, 2021. We all remember when a violent mob attempted to snuff out one of our democracy's most sacred traditions, the peaceful transition of power. That mob's attack on our nation's capital was fueled by the former president's big lie, the utterly false alternate reality that Joe Biden stole the 2020 election through widespread fraud. But the January 6th insurrection, as nightmarish as it was not the only thing that was spawned by the big lie. Inspired by the former president's baseless conspiracy theory, dozens of states have passed new laws suppressing voters and making it easier for partisan officials to overturn the will of their constituents. These have been billed as, quote, election integrity, close quote, or, quote, election security laws, close quote. Even George Orwell would be impressed by these brazen euphemisms. Disenfranchising tens of thousands of minority voters does nothing to improve the integrity of our elections. And empowering partisan actors to disqualify ballots and ignore the popular will actually makes our elections more insecure. A record number of these voter suppression laws are being considered and enacted as we head toward a major midterm election that will shape the direction of our country. Many of these laws would not see the light of day if the Department of Justice still possessed its pre-clearance powers under the 1965 Voting Rights Act. However, the Supreme Court unwisely decided to gut the Justice Department's pre-clearance powers in the Shelby County versus Holder decision in 2013. And then adding insult to injury, the Supreme Court toppled another critical pillar of the Voting Rights Act in the 2021 Brnovich decision. What they did was they even further limited the federal government's tools to combat voter suppression. So the green light from our nation's highest court and constant prodding from a man who refuses to accept reality, partisan state actors have breathed new life into the, quote, big lie, close quote. Not by breaking laws as the January 6th mob did, but by making them. Now, I happen to have a bipartisan bill to restore the Justice Department's powers to oversee and prevent states from enacting discriminatory voting laws. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I worked very hard to craft a compromise bill that's garnered Republican support here in the Senate. So there's truly a low point when Republicans recently refused to even allow debate on my bipartisan legislation. Wouldn't even allow debate. Isn't that the whole point of being a senator? To debate and vote on bills? How can you justify telling your constituents that you refuse to even allow debate on a voting rights bill with a 56-year record of bipartisanship? Are we that afraid to simply do our jobs? It bears repeating, but the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act would simply restore and update provisions of the Voting Rights Act that have been overwhelmingly supported by both parties throughout the law's history. The Voting Rights Act has been reauthorized by large bipartisan majorities in Congress 5 times and proudly signed into law by Presidents Nixon, Reagan, and George W. Bush. That's not what you might call a liberal trio of presidents. The most recent Voting Rights Act reauthorization in 2006 was a 98-0 vote here in the Senate. In fact, a number of senators still serving today, both Republican and Democrat, voted to support that legislation, as did I. Now, the compromise bill I've crafted with Senator Murkowski follows the very same blueprint of these other bipartisan efforts to restore the Voting Rights Act. Probably I'm old-fashioned, but it'd be a tragedy if senators have completely sacrificed our sense of common purpose at the altar of partisanship. We used to believe that protecting our right to vote, the very right that gives democracy its name, is bigger than party or politics. We used to believe that a system of self-government, a government of, by, and for the people, is one that's worth preserving for generations to come. And we used to believe, regardless of party, that government exists to serve the will of the people, not the other way around. And I sincerely hope we still believe these things. The only way to prove it, though, is through our actions. I don't know what the next few weeks are going to have in store, but if we have an opportunity to consider the bipartisan John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, I hope that all of us, my Republican friends and Democrats, will at least have the courage of their convictions and allow a vote on it. And if you oppose a bipartisan bill to restore a landmark voting rights law, it's had nearly 6 decades of unwavering bipartisan support, then have the courage to stand up on the Senate floor and vote against it. I, for one, I'll proudly vote yes. All the tweeting and partisan posturing that seems to consume most of our energy these days will quickly be forgotten. What will be remembered for decades is what the Senate did in our democracy's hour of peril. I hope, indeed I pray, that the answer is not nothing. Madam President, too many hide behind parliamentary procedures not to have to vote on anything. What is wrong with us? We get 6-year terms. Don't be afraid to vote. Vote yes or vote no, but stand up and let the people know where you stand and vote. This, well, we're going to block this coming to a vote means I don't have the courage to stand up and vote. That's all it means. You want to stop these things from coming to a vote, it means you don't have the courage to vote. You're not willing to go on record to vote. Or you're afraid somebody might look at your vote someday and say, why did he or she vote that way? Madam President, I've voted more than 17,000 times on this floor. I've been proud to vote them the way I have. I'm sure I could look back over decades of voting and find a vote here and a vote there and say, you know, maybe I should have voted differently, but these issues always come back up again, and I'll correct my vote. But not if we're not allowed to vote. I had one senator say that the reason we want this kind of open voting is so that we can elect just Democrats. That's balderdash. My state of Vermont has probably the most open voting, the most accessible voting of any state in the union. We also have one of the highest turnouts of any state in the union. Anybody can request an absentee ballot. Anybody can vote right up to the last minute. And is this for partisanship? I look at the last election, a little over a year ago. We elect our governor and our lieutenant governor separately. Voters all came to the polls in a record turnout. They elected a Republican as governor and a Democrat as lieutenant governor. I think the Republican who was elected is proud of the way we vote. And I know the lieutenant governor who was elected, she is proud of the way we vote, because it reflected that the voters actually vote for who they want, not on some partisan way. And Madam President, we hurt this country. And we hurt this Senate that I love if we're afraid to vote. I'm proud to be the dean of the Senate. I'm proud to be the president pro tem. But I'm not proud when we don't vote. I'm not proud when we hide behind mechanisms so we don't vote. I'm not proud to see partisan voting on nominees, something that's blocked, something where there's been far more votes against women in our Senate Judiciary Committee than I've seen in the decades I've served on that committee. We can't do this. Stand up and vote. Let people know where you stand. If it's your automatic thing to vote against women for nominations, I disagree with that, but have the courage to stand up and vote and show people where you are. That's what we have to do. If people are afraid to vote, if people have their votes heard, their votes recorded, they don't belong in the U.S. Senate, not in a body that should be the conscience of the nation. So, Madam President, I hope that we will come together. Vote these bills, these voting rights bills, up or down. In this country, we've seen too many times in the past where people were not allowed to vote or were blocked from voting for whatever way it was done. And think of every time that happened, our country suffered. Our country suffered. What we're saying is let everybody vote, whether Republicans, Democrats, or independents, stand up and vote. Have the ability to vote. Don't use artificial ways to block people from voting just because you think they may vote differently than you do. Just as I have fought all my career to make sure in my own state of Vermont, everybody has a chance to vote. Marcel and I have even done ads on our television saying, we want everybody to vote, whether you're voting for a Republican or voting for a Democrat. Get out and vote. Of course, I was hoping they'd vote for me. And I'm sure my Republican opponents hope they'd vote for them. But the point I was trying to make is it's important that everybody votes, whether they're voting for me or against me. And that's why in Vermont, we have one of the highest percentage of voters. And if we want to keep having these suppression of vote bills, we all suffer. The country suffers. Our image around the world suffers. Don't be afraid to vote. We're not going to get perfect people every time, but we can have a perfect way of voting. In the long run, the country is better off. Madam President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.